Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. This story begins in March 2011 in Deraa, Syria. School children there were arrested for scribbling anti-regime slogans in the streets. They were handed back to their families, but only after being beaten and tortured. Since then, the uprising has spread to the rest of the country and descended into civil war. By all accounts, some 14,000 people have died and thousands more have been tortured, like these young teenagers. NGO Human Rights Watch has put together a new report with a sobering title, The Torture Archipelago. To put it plainly, it is a tough read, but an essential one. It details the locations where torture is practiced, but also the methods and the names of those who carried it out. Well, my guest today participated in putting together this report and writing it. Ole Solvang is an emergencies researcher at Human Rights Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
My first question is, how did this report come to be? When and how did you decide to compile these testimonies?
Well, we've been documenting human rights violations in Syria for many, many years. But of course, when the anti-government uprising started in March last year, we put additional resources into it. So we've been interviewing people both inside Syria, but also in neighboring countries, refugees who've been fleeing from Syria ever since then. And we have documented and we've been reporting on a number of different violations. But what has really stood out as one of the most horrific aspects of the uprising and the crackdown has been the widespread and systematic use of torture. And we've reported on this before, but what is really new with this report is that this time we're focusing on the perpetrators.
This report is indeed quite different. Before we get to the details of what it says, can you tell us how you went about it, the methods, the techniques you used?
Well, it is very hard to document human rights violations in Syria today. The government is doing everything it can to prevent us from entering the country and from preventing others, journalists, the UN, to operate freely and objectively document what is going on. So it is a challenge. But what we have done, and what we have done in many other situations like this, is to conduct long, detailed interviews with the refugee populations. And in addition to that, we have also been inside Syria without official permission from the government on several occasions to go and visit the sites, to talk to people inside. And what we then do after we've collected information from the interviews is to corroborate this. We compare one interviewee who says he was tortured in this detention facility with what another person who said he was tortured in the same detention facility.
So the idea is to make sure their stories match.
Exactly. The propaganda war in Syria is quite intense from both sides. Both the government and the opposition knows the value of good media coverage in their favor. So we have to be very, very careful and make sure that everything that we say is actually corroborated, it's fact-checked, and we know that what we are saying is true.
Let's look at the findings of this report. Given what you've seen, can you say first that torture is being used systematically as a weapon and that the orders are coming from high levels of the government?
We know absolutely for sure that this is widespread and systematic. And the extent to which it is widespread and systematic is a strong indication that it is state policy. Nobody knows for sure how many people have been detained and tortured in these detention facilities. We have interviewed about 200. There are other groups who have documented the names of at least 25,000 people who have been detained. Most likely that number is a lot higher. And it's sometimes difficult to understand the reason behind this, because the torture and interrogation doesn't seem in most cases to be for information purposes, that they want to get information. In many cases, it seems purely to be a matter of punishment for participating in anti-government demonstrations and intimidation, basically telling people that here's what will happen if you go out and demonstrate again.
About the number of people that have given you their testimonies, the UN and other rights groups, NGOs, say upwards of 14,000 people have been killed. This, of course, only counts the violence on the ground, but the violence below the surface, this torture that your report talks about, do you have an estimate of how many people it could have killed in the past 15, 16 months?
Not really. We know that several people have been killed in detention. The way this usually happens is that somebody will be arrested, detained, and taken away, and then the family doesn't know to where, or doesn't hear anything else from that person for weeks, maybe months. But then in many cases, they will get a call from the local security office or from a hospital telling them to come and pick up the body. And of course, with that kind of information, it becomes very, very difficult to find out where exactly did this happen, which agency was responsible. But in several cases, we know who is responsible because either people who have been detained in those places have told us that they have seen people dying in that detention facility. But we've also spoken to defectors from the army, from intelligence services, who have talked to us about what they saw taking place in the facilities where they worked. And they have also talked about people getting killed, people being denied medical assistance and dying as a result. Again, a local organization, sort of a local network of activists, has the names of 400 to 500, around 500 people that they believe have died in detention. It's very, very difficult to say what the actual number is, but we know for sure it's significant.
And you have the names of some of the people who carried this out or ordered this. You also have in your report, and this is quite striking, maps of these torture detention centers and drawings, very graphic drawings. They're quite disturbing. Without getting into the more disturbing details, looking at the methods that are used in these detention centers, what are the main ones perhaps? And is sexual torture also being used as a major instrument from the testimonies that you've heard?
In all of these detention facilities, and we've documented and we're listing 27 of them in our report, they use a wide range of different torture methods. It spans from just regular beating, prolonged beating with various kinds of objects, sticks, batons, whips, cables, to much more sophisticated methods as well. Use of electricity, use of various kinds of devices that we see across the board. You have one type of particular torture method, which is called the dulab, the tire methods.
The wheel in Arabic for
exactly,
tire.
Exactly. And that's basically you force a detainee's hands and feet into a tire, and then making them, immobilizing them, making it impossible for them to protect themselves, and then you beat them. Another very common torture method is the shabe, which is basically taking a person, a detainee, hanging him up by his wrists from the ceiling, and in some cases so that just the toes touch barely the ground, and letting him hang like that, suspended for hours and sometimes days. And the detainees who have experienced this talk about excruciating pain eventually, about hallucinating, about being willing to do whatever to be let down from, or to have some of these torture methods stop.
This uprising all started with children being mistreated, and since last year we've heard of several cases where children were given very cruel punishments. Is this also being done systematically?
The majority of the former detainees that we have interviewed are adult men between 18 and 35. But we've also interviewed women who have been detained and tortured, elderly people, 70-year-old, 80-year-old in some cases, and yes, children as well. I've spoken to 11-year-olds who talk about being detained by the security forces, taken to one of these detention facilities, and being subjected to many of the same methods as the adult detainees. Beatings. This one person that I have in mind, he also talked about his toenails being pulled out. And some of the former detainees told us that they saw children as young as 8 in detention with them.
You mentioned earlier you had the names of some of the people who carried this out. So this report reads like a dossier of evidence that could be vital to international prosecutors. Is that something you had in mind while writing it?
Absolutely. You know, we believe that the people in charge of these detention facilities, both the people who are running them, but also, of course, the people who are directly carrying out the orders or the torture or ordering the torture, should be investigated. These are crimes against humanity, and somebody really should answer for what is going on.
In just a few seconds, the UN Security Council needs to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court for this. Do you have faith this can happen? The Security Council has been blocked.
Well, Russia has been difficult, and it has been blocking a strong Security Council action. But we really hope that by putting out the truth, by carefully documenting what is going on, and by showing also to Russia that these crimes are taking place, crimes against humanity, Russia will also support a call for accountability and eventually support UN Security Council referral to the International Criminal Court, where these crimes belong, and which is the institution that should investigate and prosecute for these crimes.
Well, thanks very much for giving us the detail of this new report, The Torture Archipelago. Ole Solvang of Human Rights Watch, thank you for being with us. And thank you at home for watching the France 24 interview. Do stay tuned, more news is coming up.